It's false storytelling. I heard it. I heard a very high-ranking person in Hollywood tell me, and I love this term. I'd never heard it before or since. This one person called it fraudulent creation.
Oof. I'm gonna make it real simple. Like, I'm with you, R&B, and I think the main problem is that Star Wars does not belong on television. And I try to buy into it. I try to be positive about each show. I was the cheerleader. I was believing in Rodriguez. There's no way Rodriguez, if you let Rodriguez do a film of Boba Fett, that just would have been killer. But maybe that committee and that Lucasfilm wouldn't have let him do that.
Well, it's funny because El Mariachi, if you follow the story of, or you follow Desperado especially, Desperado is basically about the Mandalorian.
Yeah.
And then
That's why I thought it was such a no-brainer.
You call the other Mandalorians to be like, hey, you can help me out here, and they have that great battle at the end.
That's why, and even when Rodriguez directed that one, that was probably one of the best episodes of Mando in that season 2 season.
Yeah, I agree.
Was Rodriguez's, and I was like, yes, he's gonna save Star Wars and Boba Fett, yes. But it goes back to what you were saying, that I just don't think Star Wars belongs on television. I think they've ruined Star Wars by so many television shows, and they're bad television.
I wouldn't say that Star Wars.
Dante, go ahead, and I'll be right back.
Oh yeah. I just want to chime in on this. I don't believe Star Wars wasn't meant to be on TV. I just think that it's meant to be better written.
I agree with you 100%.
Well, I think there's a lot of Star Wars stories you can tell.
Yep.
That are fitted for TV, more fitted for TV than the theater. Actually,
totally agree.
If they actually, I gotta watch my language. If they actually cared about the material, we wouldn't be complaining. There wouldn't be an issue.
If it was, I would say I think people care. It's just they don't know how to make it good.
But do you really think the people at Disney cares about the source material?
No. I think they care in the sense that they bought this source material. Here's what drives me bonkers. So, and I don't understand this at all. These larger IPs like Star Wars and Star Trek to a certain extent, before they bought Star Wars, when they brought back Star Wars in the early 90s, because it had sort of lain fallow, they had the Timothy Zahn book trilogy. They had Heir to the Empire, and then they also had the Dark Horse Comics Dark Empire 6-issue. Both of those
which I loved.
They're great. Both of them are really great. The Grand Admiral Thrawn was introduced in the Heir to the Empire books. Those were great books. They were also made by people that loved Star Wars, that sat down and said, okay, what would the Star Wars universe be like 20, 30 years after Return of the Jedi? And because they love Star Wars, they sat down and really thought about it. Like, let's extrapolate out. And the same is true of a lot of the great Star Trek novels and things that they've written. You can't make a lot of money writing a tie-in novel. Right. So you have to love it. You have to love it. And there was a lot of, after Heir to the Empire, in the 80s, there was not very much Star Wars original fiction. There was the Han Solo trilogy, Han Solo at Star's End, and then there was the Lando Calrissian trilogy, Lando Calrissian and the Mind Harp of Sharu, or the Flame Wind of Lando Calrissian and the Flame Wind of Ocean. So they had those 6 books, and then there was Splinter of the Mind's Eye. But after that, there wasn't much. Because then after Jedi, Star Wars sort of petered out in popularity.
Well, yeah, because after Jedi, the only thing left was merchandise.
Yeah, exactly.
We had nothing for a very long time when it came to Star Wars.
And then there was a conscious effort to bring Star Wars back as a brand in the 90s through those books. And then you had the Shadows of the Empire multimedia thing. All they didn't have was a movie.
Right.
They had the video game, they had the comics, they had the novel, toys, all that stuff. But nowadays, a studio spends $4.5 billion, whatever, buying this IP. and they sit down, and the studio itself is like, okay, we need this IP to do for our company the most it can do, which means we have all the elements that made Star Wars popular. And when you see something like Force Awakens being such a copy of A New Hope, you realize that the company that bought it, because they've spent so much money, they are immediately risk averse. So I think that companies that buy IPs have immediately corrupted those IPs because they can no longer be true to the base stories that they're trying to tell.
The studio needs to make money, so we got to sacrifice quality. There could be the happy medium. The problem is writers.
Yep. Well, that's the thing. And also the studio's like, okay, we're going to put why is young Princess Leia in the Obi-Wan Kenobi?
Oof.
Like why they're shoehorning. The whole thing is, here's what I don't get. Here's what I don't understand. The character of Obi-Wan Kenobi, having lived through Order 66 and seen his order, I mean, Kenobi was a believer. Kenobi was essentially, call him a religious man, and he watched his religious order destroyed in a purge from heathens, essentially.
Hokey religions was it?
Yeah, and what does the story of his redemption or him finding himself again should have been all about him, like his internal conflict. And I was hoping, like with The Mandalorian, the first episode of the third season was called The Apostate, and I'm like, they're treating, like, it's really interesting, like the Mandalorians are people of faith,
right?
And
well,
like
some of them, but yeah.
I mean, but they're their orders divided. It's like, I'm Jewish. There's Reform Jews. There's Orthodox Jews. There's people that don't. I am not a religious person myself, but I've always been fascinated by religious people, and I love the idea of religion and how it can organize societies and also tear them apart. But I figured that we were going to get something. I feel like I'm watching the fourth grade version of all this. Like the Mandalorian is so dumbed down. And the title of that episode, The Apostate, I don't think anybody watching that show knows what an apostate is. And they call it that. And I think, and that's what pissed me off. I mean, it would have been really interesting. I just don't, here's the thing. Ultimately, I don't believe the Star Wars I'm watching. I think the stories are falsely created. They're created and they have to be vetted by a corporation that wants, well, we have to have a young Princess Leia in it because we have to have young girls. We have to give them something. And this kind of thinking is wrong. These IPs became popular because they were in the first place, because they were true to the stories that they were telling. And we talked about the fact people can recognize a great story. And when I was a kid, I didn't have to watch stories where I was reflected in them. As a matter of fact, I'd rather watch stories about people I didn't know.
I completely agree with that. It goes with the same argument as race swapping, right? Or gender swapping, or whatever you want to call it. Look, I've been saying, and I've been screaming this at the top of my lungs for the past, I don't know, 5 or 6 years now. Black people don't want to see a black Batman. We don't want to see a black Superman. We want to see an original black character that we can get behind that isn't a hand-me-down, right? And these studios, it's funny, and I get it. If you're a studio, you have an IP that you have to use, but, you also got to fill some quotas. There you go, right? Win-win for the studio, right? But I think a lot of people, and we're starting to see it a lot now, people are starting to turn, man, and they're not showing up anymore for not only the theater, but these TV shows. They're not showing up because they're tired of being fed, forgive my language, this bullshit.
Well, it's false storytelling. I heard a very high-ranking person in Hollywood tell me, and I love this term. I'd never heard it before or since. This one person called it fraudulent creation.
Oof.
Yeah.
And I was like, I love that. I love that term because
wow.
The writers of the days of yore, like some of the to me, if you want to be a writer in Hollywood, you've got to start the Twilight Zone. To me, is one of the master classes of knowing how to write a story, in the sense that you had.
Oh, I totally agree. Absolutely.
The original Twilight Zone, those 157 episodes. They're not all great, but within a half an hour. I mean, I know the fourth season's an hour, but for the 4 seasons that were half-hour episodes, you set up a character or characters, a situation, a premise, whatever, and you tell this story that plays out with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's so well done. And it's so well, and the people that were writing Twilight Zone episodes were also novelists. They were short story writers. They were playwrights. They worked in many different mediums. They were professional storytellers. And nowadays, I think that the quality, people haven't put in the work. They're not, storytellers should be literary people. Well, you know, they need to have read. They need to have backgrounds.
Okay. I don't want to push back on that. I want to question that. Because, and whether it's the right fit or not, right? Marvel and Lucasfilm, they get these directors that are Academy Award winners, telling great stories of their indie films. I mean, I looked up the last director of last week's episode, which, you know, my review was I reenacted me falling asleep to it. I don't know if you've seen my review. It's stunning and brave, but I fell asleep twice. I shit you not. The next day, I needed a nap. I put the episode back on, and
wow, yikes, man.
Now, even though that's funny and that's entertaining, right? I usually, you know, I give things I'm very open and positive as far as being, you know, entertaining. This director did Minari a couple of years ago, which was this fantastic drama, you know, so. Obviously, these people can tell stories,
but they didn't write the story.
So is that it, Rob? Is that it?
Well, okay. Here's the thing. And I can't prove it 100%, but I've heard inklings out there of there are people actually writing good shit. And what happens is when they turn it in, the studios are like basically picking it apart, saying we can't sell this, we can't sell this, we can't sell this, we can't sell this. Yeah. So they throw it back at them, right? Until it's just this garbage that we end up consuming, right? So I don't want to say all writers in Hollywood are full of shit, but I do think there is a good percent of Hollywood, at least when it comes to writers, that these studios are literally not hiring writers; they're hiring activists to put out this garbage for us to consume.